Welcome to the Single Era Diaries, exploring the journey of a woman who hasn't experienced what it's like to be single in her entire adult life, and pretty much most of her teenage life too. Each episode will navigate the journey of finding a sense of identity, exploring the challenges of co-parenting, finding love of self and healing, all whilst tackling the complexities of the checkered landscape of dating and dating apps, meeting new people, and operating solo in a world that celebrates couples, marriage, and codependency. I am your host, founder of Nascent Media and newly single woman, Jade Graham, and this is the diary of my single era. I just really fancied him, and it was as simple as that. I mean, I think also we both came from families that work really hard. Both our parents work really hard. We're very hard working and very working class. So said Victoria Beckham, in reference to how her relationship with David Beckham came about in the 90s, quoted from the Beckham documentary that is now airing on Netflix. In the clip that you may have seen circulating on social media, it's doing the round right now online, David in that clip does go on to prompt Victoria to tell the truth about her so-called working class upbringing, as it transpires that she, despite viewing herself as working class, was driven to school in a Rolls Royce. But you're probably wondering, what have the Beckhams got to do with this week's episode of the Single Era Diaries, and what have they got to do with the rules of attraction? Well, this episode is all about the rules of attraction and how attraction works. And I guess over the years, what Victoria and David Beckham have demonstrated is when attraction works and when it's sustained, which it certainly appears to be with them as a couple, it's a really solid example of how beautiful the outcomes can be when attraction has developed organically over time. So, in my continued single era, I have really been wanting to get to grips with what attraction is and how it works. Like, what are the rules, particularly in this age of dating in a digital world that seems to have its own fucking rules that I can't get to grips with. And when you've been out of the game like I have been for well over a decade, the math on these rules is not mathing. So let's get into attraction. What is attraction? And what makes it so thrilling when it happens? I mean, have you ever found yourself wondering why certain people instantly connect, but in other cases there's this almost instant decision that someone isn't quite their vibe? I wonder about this all of the time because I am really big on the people that you just click with and how to find that in this sort of romantic sense with online dating. But psychologists have been delving into this pretty fascinating realm of the human condition. They've been deploying, as you might expect, a whole range of scientific methods to uncover what it is exactly that causes attraction. Although the full complexities of human attraction and the factors that underpin this, they've not been fully understood. But what the science does tell us is that attraction is intricately tied to both our hormones, go figure, and the workings of our brilliant brain. So there's a number of key variables that have been pinpointed as being the cause for attraction, and factors range things that you might expect, some that you may not, but things like similarity, proximity, so that can be physical proximity or functional proximity, familiarity, and reciprocity, which reciprocity is the practice of exchanging things with others for mutual benefit. And it's really the combination of these factors that determine the relationships that we go on to form in our lives, both platonic and romantic. And those factors, I guess, to dig into them, because this is one of the most baffling and challenging times, I think, for me at this stage of my life as a single woman. At a time that I didn't necessarily expect to be single, I really am trying to understand the factors that make attraction tick, and maybe you are too. So the first factor is, as mentioned, proximity. It's the nearness of space or time that we have with another person. And it's the proximity of how close is that relationship to us. Unsurprisingly, proximity plays a really significant role in the formation of relationships. Often our connection with our friends or our romantic partners, it in many ways feels and seems like it is a beautiful act of serendipity. And part of this is really due to how physically close we are to the individuals that we're connecting with. Research, however, has really shown that physical proximity is a key factor in relationship development, but also in sustaining relationships. And I think this is probably why the whole dating app thing can be so challenging, because proximity, of course, isn't necessarily operating in the same way when you are connecting with people digitally and virtually. I mean, for example, if you cast your mind back to when you were a student, be it at school or starting a new chapter at college or university, the social circles that you form, they typically include either your classmates, so the people that are in your classes and sharing that same learning experience with you, or it's your hallmates, your roommates, or your housemates. If you play in a particular if you have a sporting pursuit or a team or a particular interest, it's the teammates and the peers that are on that who are physically close to you in physical proximity that go on to become the relationships that grow. And the same applies to the world of work or any hobbies that you might have. That physical closeness is what's providing that common ground, and with it are the opportunities for people to interact, to get to know each other, to discover those commonalities, and ultimately all of these things lead to the formation of those friendships or those romantic relationships. But proximity isn't only about geographic distance. It also includes functional distance, which is the frequency with which we come into contact with other people. So, for instance, when you're at work, it is more likely, not always, but more likely, that you're going to bond with those that are in the same office or within the same workspace or the same team. If you're working remotely or hybrid or globally distributed, you're going to have that bond with the people that you are interacting with more frequently. Perhaps you're working on the same project, because ultimately in those scenarios you're encountering others in the same functional space as you, and it's that commonality where the bonds are forming. So with all of that in mind, naturally, being in this online dating hellscape that I continue to find myself in, I really wanted to get to grips with, and for those of you listening who are also in the online dating hellscape, like getting to grips with how does and how can the concept of proximity apply to relationships that are online. I personally would really love to understand this. And so in research preparation for the show, I came across some work by an academic. Her name is Deb Levine, and she actually researched this puzzle, this conundrum that I'm in at the moment, that you might also be as well in the online dating world. And she researched this in a paper titled Virtual Attraction: What Rocks Your Boat? And in this, Deb Levine, it was way back in 2000, which is like 23 years ago. absolutely terrifying. But she argued that in the context of developing online relationships and attraction, the functional distance that we have with those people relates to being present in the same virtual space at the same time. So back when this paper was written, it would have been chat rooms. Do you remember those? Or internet forums. In the present day, of course, it's the time that you're on these apps at the same time. So you're happening to be on an app and you're happening to be on it at the same time as somebody else that you then match or connect with. That is equated to being the digital equivalent of crossing paths in the physical world, which makes sense, I guess. But the difference is, in the physical world, if you're showing up to work each day and you're seeing the same people every day, that's a very different experience to having to log onto an app with a billion other people that are trying to vie for your attention, and all these pop-ups trying to distract you from the people that you've already started speaking with. So it makes sense on paper, but maybe Deb Levine could do a new research study into how it works on Hinge or Tinder, for example. Anyway, I've really been thinking about proximity and attraction, and maybe you have found this as well. And the reason specifically is that I met a guy virtually on one of these apps, and it was way back at the start of the summer, and I really liked the guy. Like, I really liked him. Like, I liked his look, I liked his demeanour, he matched with me, like, we seemed to have great chat, a lot in common. We just seemed to have a really great vibe, like lovely energy, and every time we spoke, it seemed to be, really nice, the sort of thing that you would ideally like to build on in real life. But we never actually got to meet. We had a date confirmed and something with work came up and we rescheduled, and then we agreed that we were going to meet when he got back from his holiday, and then neither of us really contacted each other properly in the lead up to that new date, and so the new date never happened. Now, you could put this down to either one of us not being that into each other, but I don't know that I believe that. Maybe that is a little bit of delusion, who knows. But I know, or at least I think I know, that if we would have happened across each other, if I would have happened across this guy in real life, like in a coffee shop or in a bar or just out and about, then I really think that we would have had a connection, because it just felt like that's where it was going, at least from the messaging back and forth. And if you have found yourself in this situation as well, like, please let me know if you managed to recover the situation and how you did that, because I'm at a loss as to how to do that with this chap. Anyway, this is one of several reasons why I really like these dating apps, because I think when we consider how attraction needs to work for us as humans, they're removing that key part of what is so vital to moving connections along, and that's the in-person vibe. Like, you can only really determine whether you vibe with somebody in real life. So the science of attraction builds on proximity, of course, and it's not proximity alone, there's also familiarity. And one of the reasons why proximity holds so much significance in attraction is its role in cultivating the factor of familiarity. Now, again, this may be unsurprising. People tend to feel a much stronger connection to those who are familiar with them. And simply being around, the very act of simply being around someone, repeatedly encountering them, that increases the likelihood of developing an attraction. But along with that, familiarity brings a sense of security. It really allows us to anticipate and to understand the behaviour of individuals who feel familiar. And so going back to the opener of the show and thinking about how Victoria Beckham described the familiarity that she felt in that initial attraction with David, she presented that as being like this sense of familiarity around their backgrounds, their being from hard working class parent backgrounds, and that shared sense of knowing and that sense of familiarity of what that looks and feels like is no doubt what helped to enable the attraction between them to flourish. I mean, that and the fact that she was a Spice Girl and he was David Beckham and both were incredibly hot. I'm sure they were also really key contributing factors. But as we'll get onto in a moment, the physical attraction is not enough to sustain attraction in the long term. But with that, I've been thinking about how this has been playing out for me, because I'm also I would describe myself as being from a working class background. My family is working class / middle class, I guess. But I've only ever really felt comfortable, and I've only ever formed relationships with people who are from a very similar background to mine, which is sort of working class, moved into the middle class kind of guys, like very down to earth, very hardworking, non-pretentious, non-flashy, non-showing. And that has very often, at least when I was in the corporate world, was pretty much at odds with a lot of the people that I worked with who were from sort of upper middle class and like very privileged backgrounds actually. And I just found that I was never, ever, 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 regardless of the fact that I was in a relationship, but I was never attracted or interested in that type of guy. Like, I just am really a down-to-earth kind of vibe. And this is a tough gig because right now in the single era, it seems like most of the down-to-earth guys in this category around my age are married, which is just excellent. You know, it's just fantastic. But the research itself, it also indicates that we tend to favour what is familiar. And we do this very often on a subconscious level. And I think this makes sense that regardless of whether your socioeconomic background and condition changes, either within your childhood or even when you become an adult yourself, fundamentally, the subconscious programming that you have received and that you have developed in your youth, that really does help us to form some of the more fundamental principles of what and who we are attracted to. And so that's no doubt why, in my own case, if I'm ever approached by a hoorah Henry, I am not into them. You know, they can brag about the cricket grounds that they own all they like. It just makes me want to vom. But there are other key factors in the rules of attraction as well, of course. I mean, there's aesthetic attraction. So the physical nature of how people look. And this really, when it comes to the apps, like, I'm a really big believer that you have to have, in addition to all of the very vital aspects of attraction, like, you have to fancy the person. You have to feel attracted to a person. And so the look of a person, particularly on the apps, is really the initial thing that you have to go off. I say this because a really good friend of mine was actually kind of horrified at the way in which I select guys on dating apps, because I really have very little interest in the bio. I mean, I would ideally like the bio to be short, sharp, ideally amusing or at least quirky or different. Like, anything War and Peace, I'm absolutely not into it. And I'm really going on aesthetics to begin with, which, I don't know, maybe I should be ashamed to say that, but I like pretty things. What can I say? I'm really looking at, like, the face of the person, and it's like, do I fancy your face? And then my next, like, decision-making piece around that is, well, how good is your chat? Like, how good is your opening gambit? Can you hold good chat? Are you interesting? Because, look, let's face it, we can all write a decent bio. We can all go to Google. We can find a bio. We can, you know, there's a way of us formulating a great bio. But if you don't think the person, once you've read their bio, is somebody that you're attracted to, it doesn't matter if they've got a great bio or not. It doesn't matter if they're like a Pulitzer Prize winning, Nobel Prize winning, like, amazing human being that's changing society for good. I mean, all of that's fantastic, but if you don't find the person fit and they've got no chat, just not going to fly, at least not in my book. The other attraction is platonic attraction, and this can really be confused with the whole, like, friend zone thing. I'm doing this in air quotes, like friend zoning. It's a zone that is really questionable because actually Friend zoning it's really more platonic, and it's typically that the person or yourself is putting that individual into that space because you're either scared or not ready to commit, or that you just don't see them in a way that equates to it progressing to a romantic connection. And thinking about this, I have to say, I think that I was put in the friend zone by the guy I really liked, who I mentioned earlier, and it really pisses me off. It really pisses me off, I'm not going to lie. Because not only am I a hot catch, I'm really funny and I'm just great to be around. But hey, look, if somebody's not that into you, there's not a great lot that you can do to change that. And that's the reality. There's also emotional attraction. So this is arguably one of the most significant forms of attraction that you need to have. So even if you've got all of those other boxes ticked, if you don't then move into emotional attraction without having that, there is not very much that's going to draw you to that person. But then specifically, there's not a lot there that's going to keep you there either. So this is really another challenge that I have found with the dating apps. I mean, you might be catching up on the theme here. I have an issue with the dating app. You might also be having this as well if you find yourself on them, because how do you create and sustain an emotional connection with someone online when you're being distracted by your life outside of the app, potentially being bombarded with other options, messages and life outside? Like, there's so many things going on, and I really do think that in order to establish an emotional connection, like, you have got to meet in real life. Like, it feels fairly vacuous to have an emotional connection that is just based off messaging. So that does beg the question, what are the signs of emotional attraction? So first up, there's the appreciation for the other person's mind. Because look, if you have zero about you in my book, I just cannot be into you. Doesn't matter how fit or attractive you are. I always think of Joey Essex whenever I talk about this sort of like fit and there not being a great deal going on. No disrespect to Joey Essex. He seems like a thoroughly lovely guy. He's very attractive, but I could not be in that situation. It would just not work out for me. Emotional attraction finds its core. I mean, it's really down to how much you appreciate the way that person is able to think. And when you admire a person's thought process, when you admire their perspective on life, it really signifies a strong emotional connection. And with that, what you then yearn for is their attention. You are so eager to absorb the insights that they share that the attraction really does become deeper, like much, much deeper. Next up are shared values. And these, oh my goodness, these to me absolutely matter, like so vitally. I'm such a values driven person, and if you are as well, like, you'll find that immediate emotional bond is what forms when you quickly discover that you have shared values. And I think this is really what I just feel like this is when you move into that vibe. I think people's values determine their vibe. I'm going to have a look into that a little more to see as to whether that is true. But when you have got that shared value system, that connection moves beyond the physical appearance. It moves deep into what your beliefs are, what your principles are, what your values are, how they align. And that is what creates that really profound emotional connection, which is super hard to replicate, if at all. Like, I would even go so far as to say impossible to replicate. Like, it's super important for me that a guy has a good relationship with their family. I want them to have a great circle of people around them. I want them to be purpose-filled and to have a sense of what their contribution is in the world. And crucially, so crucial, absolutely, like, they must have a life that they live with integrity and truth. Like, that is absolutely key. And then the additional aspects that help the connection move along are growing connection through shared interests. And the more you get to know someone, the more that you find yourself drawn to them. It really is a clear sign of emotional attraction, because as you uncover those new facets of their personality and your feelings intensify, It's what underscores your emotional investment. The last thing is caring about the other person's happiness. So, the psychology of attraction, if you're wanting someone else's happiness and you're kind of like, you really care that they're happy, that's such a strong and beautiful indicator of that emotional attraction. And your desire for their well-being and the constant sort of positive mindset that you have, that reveals a lot about the emotional connection that you have with them. You genuinely wish for their happiness and positivity in all aspects of their life. There is a flip side, though, to attraction. And the flip side of that is how unpredictable it can be. I just think this is the nightmare of trying to meet people in 2023. Like, the time that we're in, this whole bizarre dating culture where, like, you don't focus on connecting with a person to see whether it goes somewhere. It's like date several people at the same time. Like, what? It makes my head spin. And as a result of that, there is a lot of this unpredictability anyway with attraction, but it's really heightened in the time that we're in. This is definitely one of the most frustrating things about attraction. You might have heard recently, and this is in relation to how fleeting attraction can be and how quickly it can go from being like 100 to 0. You might have heard that there has been a recent Twitter trend where guys have been sharing the moment that they started hating their girlfriend, which is basically a thread demonstrating what I would describe as being really the more insidious side of attraction starting to wane. The thread, I've linked an article on it in the show notes, starts off with, and this is the quote, "That phase where you slowly start hating your girlfriend is crazy." It was written by this account at SK1T Guru. I mean, it sounds unguru-like to me, but there have been so far well over 140,000 likes of agreement with this comment, and it keeps going up. And the responses in the thread have ranged things like, "When you keep messing up on purpose so that she can break up with you, but she keeps forgiving you." And then the original poster following up on that with another tweet saying, "You'll be having a bad day and then she hugs you and it becomes even worse." And 30,000 people have liked that comment, which suggests that there are a lot of men out there who feel the same. And look, let's hope that this is a really extreme example of attraction being unpredictable. But I think it's also safe to say that we are living in a culture right now where how attraction works and how unpredictable it is absolutely being fueled by the digital landscape that we live in. I mean, ghosting, breadcrumbing, swiping left, like liking people and then completely disappearing. I mean, it's a pretty bizarre time to be alive and to be single in this world. Like, it really is a really challenging space to be in, because the constant push and pull of attraction, thanks to that multitude of options in a way that you wouldn't have in real life. I mean, I wouldn't open my front door and have 400 people that have all liked me waiting outside. I mean, that would just be nuts, right? It does make it a lot more challenging to filter in and filter out the people that you're actually attracted to see whether it's going to go somewhere. So I think all of this begs the question, if we know how attraction works and so much of it is really dependent on proximity and familiarity and shared values, does that mean that in the age of the digital landscape, that the age of love is actually moving to a point where it's dead? Because when I look online and I see people that are talking about dating apps, it does seem to be the same theme of the same challenges, that they're just not getting out of the talking stage, because you can't really build familiarity with complete strangers that you have no shared common ground with. It's just not the same as we go to the same coffee shop every week and I catch your eye and I think you're really hot and you ask me, to sit down for coffee with you. It's a very different world that we're operating in. So is love dead in the age of the app? I mean, who knows? All I know is that I really miss the time of the mid-noughties, which is when I was last single, and you could still just be asked to go grab a drink. You'd just be asked for your number in a bar, and that was fine, you know? I mean, the thing is, the last time I was single, I actually was 24. And the dating pool was quite literally absolutely everyone. And now it's filled with avoidant guys on dating apps who make you think that they really like you, but they don't ever actually go out with you, which is a damn shame. It's a damn shame. On that somewhat somber note of the Single Era Diaries, it does wrap up this week's episode. And, you know, if you're listening to this and you have cracked the code on how to progress initial attraction on these apps where you think, oh my gosh, you're so handsome, like you're just delightful, you have lovely chat, I really like you, and it goes nowhere. Like if you've cracked the code on that, then by all means feel free to contact me. Not only am I all ears, I may well interview you on the show to share the pearls of wisdom. As ever, contact details and resources for today's show and the research that's been used to pull it together can be found in the show notes. And thank you for listening. As ever, if you have enjoyed the show, feel free to share with a friend, like and review wherever you get your podcasts. And long live the single era, and catch you next week. Peace out. The Single Era Diaries is produced and distributed by Nascent Media and executive produced by me, Jade Graham. Podcasts grow by being liked and shared, so if you enjoyed today's show, then please be sure to like and share with a friend who you think will enjoy the show too. Subscribe, and if you have a moment to rate and review wherever it is that you listen to your podcast, that would be super appreciated too. Thank you for listening, and peace out.